Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we're continuing our study through the book of Genesis. We've been working on the whole book. So if you are interested in starting at the beginning, if you are just coming across this teaching now, I'm popping the link on the picture on the screen, but you can go. There is a link, and the easiest place to go is my webpage on our Genesis page, and there you can click and see all of our videos on Genesis. So that's on the screen. Go do that. And here at the outset, I will ask you, please, in order to help promote this teaching, give us a thumbs up. Also, if you have not, subscribe. Been having a lot of people subscribe on both channels. Subscribe and also leave a comment. Had a few people leave comments. I'm asking all of you, whoever you may be, leave a comment. It's part of how these systems decide what videos ought to go out. It thinks if people are commenting, it's good stuff. Let's put it in front of others. And I know you think it's good stuff because you're watching. So leave a comment. Just say hi, thanks, hello. You're all wrong about this, or I really liked what you taught about that. Whatever it might be, I don't care. Leave a comment. So we're picking up. We just finished chapter 35. We just finished chapter 35, and now we're to chapter 36. And because I care for you and love my audience, we're not going to cover chapter 36 of Genesis. There's nothing awful in chapter 36. It is a long litany of names that you don't know. It is the generations, the genealogy, and the Hebrew word is Toledoth, of Esau, Jacob's brother, who's also known as Edom. There's a land of Edom that we see play out in the history of Israel. They are all Abrahamic in origin. But we're not going to cover this because it's boring. Now, there are some things, if you want to geek out, and you'll see that Amalek is named here, one of the giant clans, other things. But for the broad cross-section of our audience, there just isn't anything all that interesting here, and I would lose you. So because I don't want to lose you, I'm going to quit talking about this, and we're going to jump right to Genesis 37. Joseph. The balance of this book, there are 50 chapters. The 37 definitely through 48, it's all about Joseph and what happens with Joseph. Okay. So very important. It's a good thing to file away. Where does the stuff about Joseph begin? Well, it begins in Genesis 37. I'm going to ask you to do something, and this is important as you study the word, and especially this. I want you to wipe the slate clean in your mind of what you think about Joseph, good, bad, indifferent, details, the pictures you have possibly, if you were like me, the pictures you have etched in your mind of little Joseph and his coat of many colors, which is wrong. Coat of many colors, those Sunday school pictures that right now, many of you I know are seeing those. You can, the little Sunday school books or handouts, you're seeing those pictures of Joseph. Wipe all that stuff out of your mind. I want you to think about it anew. That is an important thing to do when we are looking at these sections of scripture where there are people who are very familiar to us. Get rid of all those preconceived notions. Let's jump in. Now, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. There again, this is that word, Toledoth. And over here on the right, they're not in order, but you can see all the references where we have that word Toledoth. A couple of them are repeats, but basically, there are 10 sections to the book of Genesis. In the author's mind, in Moses' mind, there are 10, we would call them chapters. That's an us word. That's an us concept. There are 10 major parts to the book of Genesis. Now take that with 10 and apply that to what we see in biblical numerology. 10 is the number of completeness. You want the origins of all the stuff that matters, because that's what Toledoth history, generations, gets translated all these various ways, because it's trying to convey that idea, the origins of all these things. You've got it here. Now, interestingly, Moses doesn't divide it the way we would think Moses would. Do you notice what's starting now? Everything up until now, take out 36, it's a standalone. Did the same thing with Ishmael, quick little Toledoth on Ishmael and all his descendants. Take out the section, the Toledoth on Esau. Everything up to this point in the life of Jacob has been part of the generations, the Toledoth, the section of the origins on Isaac. Now we get to Jacob, and Jacob's an old guy by now. And it goes right into talking about Joseph, who is now 17 years old. It's just interesting. They don't think the way we do. And we could go into the interrelation of familial connections and standing on the shoulders of others. The Toledoth, the generations about Jacob, it's about the stuff that goes down with Joseph. Remember, they're not like us in many ways. They had a different culture, a different worldview, a different context, a matrix into which they're better yet, a matrix that formed their thinking, a matrix of understanding of the world and culture and family, all those things. They're different than us. So when we read this, we need to work hard to try to understand their way of thinking. Moses is here telling you that the most important stuff about Jacob is this stuff about Joseph. Kind of interesting. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now, I'm going to put this out here at the outset, because I believe it to be true. Joseph is one of two major players. I hate the word character because that sounds like a character in a book or a movie. He's one of the two major players in the scriptures, apart from Jesus, about whom nothing bad is recorded. It's Joseph and fill in the blank. Who's the other one? Daniel. Joseph and Daniel, exemplary people of faith. And I believe that because of the way we read our thinking into the text, we see some negative things about Joseph that are not truly negatives. They're not character flaws. They're not sins. This is one of them. He brought a bad report about the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. I've thought a lot about Joseph, and I've been thinking about him for a long time. And every time I read it, I just try to look into the text and let it speak to me and see what things might be there that I'm missing. And what I have over decades of thinking about Joseph and reading and studying and reading what other people say about Joseph, this is what I have concluded. Joseph is tremendous. And as I say this, listen to what I say and think about whether you might know someone who falls somewhat into these categories. Joseph is a tremendously talented individual. We're going to see that play out with what he does for none less than Pharaoh. He's a tremendously talented individual. He is just straightforward. If he thinks it, he will share it. He will say it. He's not concerned about the perceptions of others. He doesn't play those games. And because of that, and he's also something else. He's 17 years old. What did you know when you were 17 years old? It's been a long time since I was 17, but when I look back on it and I try to think about specific things starting my senior year of high school, I know this. I was naive. I was naive. Joseph is naive. He doesn't see long-term at this point in time the implications of what he's doing. He's a guy who does what's right, whether others are going to like it or not. Now, some of these things that I'm saying, that one right there, of whom does it remind you? We are concurrently with this doing a study of the book of John, and in that I have talked repeatedly with Jesus' interaction with the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders. He says what is true without regard to how they're going to receive it. He's going to speak the truth. There are another thing about Joseph to think about, stripping away the Sunday school veneer. There are many things about Joseph in which we see typological glimpses of things about Jesus. There are similarities with Joseph and Jesus, and also similarities typological. A type is this happened with this person, and that's kind of a type, an image of what happens with this person later on. Also a type of the nation of Israel in its totality and what happens to them. And I will point these things out as we go. But the first one is Joseph is going to speak truth, and those who are closest to him are not going to receive it well. John 1, he came to his own, and his own received him not, with Jesus. So the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, we'll pop this graphic up here because it's good to keep it straight. And we've seen this before. These are the wives of Jacob, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. Bilhah and Zilpah were the handmaidens of Leah and Rachel. Well, he's not giving a bad report about Benjamin. Benjamin's young and staying home. Joseph's only 17. He's giving a bad report about the children of Bilhah and Zilpah. So it's Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Those are the four. But the sons of Leah aren't going to like it either. But that's what's going on here. He brought a bad report about them to his father. He saw something they were doing that they shouldn't have been doing, the way they were caring for the sheep, whatever it might be. They weren't paying enough attention. They weren't supervising the herdsmen well enough, whatever it might be. He reports that to his dad. He's doing what he thinks is right. Now Israel, here we go. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Let's stop right there. If you've been listening to me for some time, you'll know that I was going to stop here. A parent loving one of their children more than the others is always wrong. I'm not going to say it's a problem. It's wrong. It's wrong, and it results in problems. They're all your children. Love them the same. You know which I've blessed with 6 children, my wife and I. You know which ones are my favorite? The ones I'm talking to at the moment. And that's just a silly way of saying they're all my favorites. They're all different. They've all got unique skills, talents, abilities. Love them all. No favorites. No favorites. And it gives the reason, because he was the son of his old age, and he was also the son of his favorite wife, the one he wanted, Rachel. We can make excuses for our own bad decisions and actions and try to take us off the hook for the negative impact it has on others, because When children know that mom and dad have a favorite, it messes up the other kids. And more than that, it messes up the family dynamics. And that goes on long after mom and dad are gone. It's just bad news. Also, as if that weren't enough, also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. This is textbook dysfunction, family dysfunction, right? Whose fault is it? It's dad's fault. Now, it doesn't get everybody else off the hook. Hating your brother and not being able to speak peaceably to him, that's not right. But how did it start? It started because he had a favorite and he made him a tunic. He did not, listen carefully, he did not make him a tunic of many colors. I'm not going to go into the particulars of how that resulted as being the translation. It comes from the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the ancient Greek translation called the Septuagint. Because of the word they used, it ended up in English as many colors. If you wanted to be precise, it's a tunic with long sleeves. It's a tunic with long sleeves. And the word only occurs in Scripture in one other place, and that is in 2 Samuel 13 with Tamar and the daughter of David, who gets molested by her brother. It said that the king's virgin daughters had these special robes. I think of it, and I think of long sleeves. Working people don't have long sleeves. Why? Because if you're going to work, you just got to roll them up. Long sleeves indicates rank, and culturally that has been the case in many cultures throughout the world. Decorations on sleeves. In the military, where do they show their rank? On their sleeves, right? It's right there, and on their shoulders for officers. But he gave him a robe that said he was more important. How'd you think that was going to play out, Dad? Well, Dad's going to suffer for it as well, but it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't a good idea. And his brothers hated him. How bad did they hate him? How badly? They could not speak peaceably to him. That's despise. That's loathe. All these different words that come to mind. That's what was going on. Now, here we get to Joseph. And people will read this and read arrogance and pride. I think he's never condemned for it and for those things. And you can read this and see it just as ignorance and naivete being best. But also the context here. Dad had given him a robe that signified he was special. He was going to be something special. There was no doubt he was Dad's favorite. And then Joseph has these dreams. You hear dream and you think, well, that can be anything. I had a dream last night. I was being chased down the hall by a cucumber. I didn't. But our dreams, we don't see any significance in it. In the scriptures, in these days, dreams were understood to be messages from God, especially a dream like this. We'll see that play out later with Joseph. Dreams are a common theme in the book of Joseph. Joseph had a dream and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." Now, sheaves. What is a sheave? Imagine a big thing of tall grass, wheat, and you've cut it, and it's still standing up, and you tie a rope around it to gather it together. That is a sheaf, and multiple is sheaves. So all of theirs out there in the context of work, he'd already reported on his brothers because they were doing things wrong. Now all of their sheaves bow down to his. Now, you can read that. This is being arrogance. It's prophecy. It's prophecy. Have you ever had a dream where it was made clear to you that you're going to rule over your entire family and be wildly important? I haven't. Joseph did, and it was from the Lord, because this comes true. He shared it with his brothers. That we can definitely chalk up to naivete, that they wouldn't react negatively to that. But again, I'm thinking of a couple of people who were very dear to me in particular, that they just tell you what they think, what's going on. And sometimes I'm thinking one individual in particular who I just love dearly. And he would be saying things, and the way he was saying it, and he was just trying to get the information out there. And I would be sitting there, and the setting is in a meeting. I would be sitting there going, you could probably be putting that in a better way. That's probably not going to be received well. He wasn't trying to upset anybody. It's just the way he presented data. That's what I see here with Joseph. That and naivete, that he's just telling them that he had this dream. And his brother said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? And don't forget this: family pecking order. He was number 11. He wasn't number 1, firstborn. That's Reuben. He wasn't 2 or 3. That's Simeon and Levi. He wasn't 4. That's Judah. He was number 11. To them, this is just, besides the fact they already didn't like him, it's absurd beyond measure, but it is what God is going to bring about. That has to influence and guide our thinking on this, doesn't it? Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to me. We'll stop here and talk about this a little bit. Tonight, I want you to do this if you're in a place where the weather is clear, and tonight, walk out and look up at the stars and just think about them for a moment. You'll have thoughts about, oh, that's the Big Dipper. Oh, that's Gemini. Oh, that's that particular star. It's the closest one to us, and it's how many ever light years from Earth. Oh, that's the moon. It's 235,000 miles away. You'll think those things. They did not think those things when they looked up at the stars. They had a spiritual interpretation of those stars. There's a reason they're called heavenly bodies. Heavenly bodies. They believed them to be deities. That explains why in various religions, the sun, the moon, those things are worshipped. The constellations are looked at the way they were. They didn't think about them the way you did. They didn't see what you saw. I could really go off on an important tangent that's even Genesis related about that, but if I do, I'll just say this as a teaser. I need to go back and redo the video on Genesis 15, 1 through 6. I've had something shown to me, an epiphany tied with that, and how we understand Abraham looking up and seeing the stars and being told, so shall your descendants be, becoming something more, translated eternally. But I'm not going to go into that any further now. So he told his father and brothers, and his father rebuked him. Even Jacob rebukes him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him. But his father kept the matter in mind. Again, this comes across as uppity. It comes across as presumptuous to them. It has to factor into the way we interpret this, that God was showing him these things. This was going to play out. This very thing. They were going to come twice and bow down before him and beg for mercy and food and grace. And then they were going to come again, bringing Benjamin the second time, and on behalf of the father and the whole family, bowing down to him and begging for mercy and food and sustenance and forgiveness. Their sheaves bowed down to him. They were going to come and see him because they had no sheaves, they had no food, and he was going to send them back with grain, returning the money in their sacks. He didn't even make them pay for it. All of these things, big picture, have to factor into how we look at this 17-year-old young man and think about him. He was different. He's not you and me. Joseph, on top of being one of the two people in the scriptures about whom nothing negative is written, you can't say that about Moses. You can't say it about Noah. You can't say it about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or certainly not any of his brothers. You can only say it about Daniel, Joseph, and Daniel, the only ones about whom nothing negative is told to us. He had plenty of opportunities to be angry with God, and he never did it once. That's exemplary character. You want to assign arrogance or pride or any of that? I don't. I think he's special. I think he's different. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." Now, map time. We love our maps here at Decoding the Deception. My computer does this faster when I'm not recording and broadcasting in the different places that I am. It gets a little bogged down. They are down here, somewhere in the region of Hebron. They are up here pasturing the flocks. You took the livestock where there was food. You couldn't truck it in. Back in my day, on the farm, you had feed delivered. None of that. You had to take them where the feed was. So they're up here, and they're actually going to end up a good bit north of Shechem when he goes to find them. They're in Dothan, and that's up there. But you look down here and see the scale. This is about 50 miles. 50 miles. You had to go where there was pasture, and he's going to send Joseph to them. Now, again, Dad, maybe we say he's oblivious to the dynamics here and what's going on, but he's also, he's sending him to them. Why wasn't he with them? He was 17. He wasn't a baby. David was out watching over his father's flocks when he was 12, 13 years old on his own. Why didn't he send him with him? Because his father treated him special. In sending him, what's the message? What's the message? If I've got 12 boys, one's too young to be out there, 10 of them are out there, and I send number 11 out to them, what's the point in that? He wants to know how things are going. He might be sending instructions, any of that kind of stuff. Dad is treating Joseph in a special way. He is assigning Joseph, the one with the long sleeve robe that he apparently wore all the time, he is assigning to him authority that outstripped his age and family ranking. None of this is wise on his father's part. So Joseph said, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring word back to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. So that journey that I just showed you. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" And he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. He had to go farther, and he found them in Dothan. And he is supposed to bring a report about them. Now, when they saw him afar off, it's wide open country. Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." Right there, that's their plan. We're going to kill him. And this word for kill, it's not just kill, it's slaughter. It's a word that's used for kill primarily in brutal warfare. It's the word that's used for kill in ancient literature when there's been a battle and the wounded are lying there and the victors are standing victorious in the field, and they go around, and battle was very unpleasant. You didn't necessarily kill somebody, you just disabled them so they couldn't keep on fighting, and you moved on. The people who were lying there bleeding and dying, maimed, they'd walk around and kill them. That's this word. That's the word used here. It's also used of just butchering animals. This was angry. They didn't just say kill him, slaughter him is really the word. How could they identify him from far off? Because he's got on that fancy robe. They can see it's him by his appearance, even at a distance. And some people, depending on where you live and what the topography of land that with which you are familiar, you'll think, how could you seem far enough away? Well, I have lived in places, and I've been in places where you can see miles and miles and miles and miles. That's the way things were here. And also in a dry, arid climate, very clear air, you can see very far. This one perplexes me. This one perplexes me. I went and looked at this verse 19. I've got a thing here in my Logos Bible software where it will show you multiple English translations. Everybody translates this as dreamer. That's only part of what it says. It's two words. This is master, chief, head, and this is dreamer. He's the master of dreams, is what that means literally. Master of dreams, which can be, I'm not going to get into the nuances of grammatical construction in ancient Near Eastern languages. It can also be understood as master in his dreams. And why? Here, I'll show you why the different translations, we need to get it to the right verse here. Everybody just translated as dreamer, 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 dreamer. All the different translations, King James, ESV, NIV, NASV, they all translate it as just dreamer. And I don't get it. And I looked, double checked it, and went back and looked in the Hebrew again, checked resources there, make sure I'm not reading something incorrectly. But there's more to it than just dreamer. And look at the callous disregard, cast him into some pit. That's like what you do when you kill a varmint. You just dump it somewhere out of the way. That's the way they are talking about their brother. Now, we're going to see in this some interesting dynamics. You know, it's easy to make one-dimensional caricatures of these people. Okay. We're going to see in them, and we'll talk about it again when the time comes, when they come to Joseph in Egypt, true repentance and remorse over what they had done, guilty conscience in them over what they are here doing. But at this time, this degree of malevolence toward their brother is ruling in their hearts. And stop on that one for a moment. Don't think it couldn't happen to you. Paul puts it this way: let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Once the nose of the camel of sin gets under the tent flap, it's really hard to keep the whole thing out. So we need to use this as a cautionary tale. These are the 12 tribes of Israel here, the patriarchs who were talking this way, who were doing this. And yes, later they will repent and truly have remorse. But right now, there's nothing but slaughter in their hearts. But Reuben, now we got to go look. Reuben, which one is he? Well, Reuben is the oldest. 12 sons of Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, on and on. He's the oldest. He's the number one son. He's the number one son. He's the one who made the power play with dad's concubine. But still, in the way these 12 men that you see on the screen here, you don't see all of them, because here, now that I say that, there, these 12 men that you see on the screen here, they looked at Reuben as the number one son. And if you come from a big family and there's a number one son, you tend to think that way. He gets deferential treatment. He's the head. He's the boss. So Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. Now, in this setting, in this situation, with the things we have been told, I am not going to try to paint Reuben as a saint. We've got funky, dysfunctional dynamics at play. It could well be Reuben's trying to get back in dad's good graces because he made that power play, sleeping with his concubine, which was him trying to take total control of the clan right then and there. He's trying to get back in dad's good graces. If I bring his favorite son back, maybe he'll forgive me. Maybe when the time comes, I won't get skipped over along with Simeon and Levi, so that Judah ends up with the blessing. That could be at play here. We can't rule it out. I'm not saying that's absolutely the case. It seems a plausible view of things. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. A lot of times in the bottom of a pit, there would be an accumulation of rainwater, so there would be something there for the guy to drink, but they intended for him to die, no matter what. Maybe they weren't going to slaughter him, massacre him. That would almost be favorable to being left in a pit in an arid wilderness with no water and taking several days to die an agonizing death. Talked before, these threads that we're going to follow through this account of Joseph. These things that are typological pictures that make us, at least in our mind, think, oh, yeah, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Jesus, those callous, uncaring guards stripped him of his robe, and it was seamless. And they said, let us not tear it. And they cast lots for his clothing. Kind of hard not to think of that when you see this Joseph, who was going to be used for what? He was going to be used by God as a worker of salvation for his brothers, Israel, the nation that was not yet a nation. These are typological pictures of salvation that when the ancient Israelite in your head, say hello to him, give him a cup of coffee, it's time for him to inform you. When he saw these things, this is what he would see. This is what he would see, especially if it's an Israelite in the day of Jesus. They would have just read this and seen these motifs, these patterns in Scripture that come up again and again. It's what he would have saw. It's what he sees. So let him inform you. Then they took him and cast him into the pit, and the pit was empty and there was no water. Just callous, just so hard-hearted. And it is where hate takes you. I don't care who you are. Hate, that is where it will take you. So beware. Don't let it get its nose under the tent flap. And what they do, the callousness and disregard, hard-heartedness just goes on. And they sat down to eat a meal. Hey, you guys want to order pizza? Brother's over there in that pit crying out for mercy. Do you think he just went down there and didn't say anything? Do you think he didn't beg them and ask them what they were doing as they grabbed him and took his robe off and threw him down there naked into a pit down there? Do you think he wasn't saying, please, please, please don't do this. Please come get me out. And they're sitting there deciding what they're going to eat. Need to think this stuff through. Put yourself in the picture. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them to Egypt. So Judah, this one here, Judah, the one from whom Jesus will descend, Judah says, oh, what profit is there in if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? There's good money to be made here. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. Do you know who sells people into slavery? Their own people. Their own people, historically, and honest, not tempered by current views on slavery, which I'm not saying that's all wrong, but there's parts of history that they overlook. The one who sells people into slavery is their own people. That's the way it has always been, and that's not new. In more modern times, it's always been the case. People sell their own into slavery. And he is our brother and our flesh. When you sold someone into slavery, you know what you knew about what was going to happen to them? You knew it wasn't going to be good. That's the only thing you knew. And if you weren't so hard-hearted and actually contemplated what the outcome might be for them, it was just going to be a sliding scale of how bad it could be. How bad might it be? It could be pretty bad. You could end up working in a salt mine. Or today, you could end up digging lithium with his bare hands so people can have their electric cars. That's Judah. That's now, later on, keep this in mind, we're going to see Judah play a major role later on in one of those bowings down. That was terrible grammar. In one of those instances of them bowing down before Joseph, we're going to see Judah play a key role here. People can be redeemed. People can repent, but it's not there in their hearts now. And his brother listened. Then Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. You can't miss that picture. Now, there are those who, if you're watching different places, I know you probably look at things on the internet about scriptures in more than one place. There are some people who will go off on, well, were they Ishmaelites? Were they Midianites? Which were they? And you can go down all kinds of etymological rabbit trails that go absolutely nowhere. Okay. Terms could be used in different ways. Ishmaelites, this descendants of Ishmael, Midianites. Midianite, there are places where Midianite is simply used as these traveling traders. And don't forget, this is just a good geographical point. There's a reason God put his chosen people right here. You know why? It was the through road for everything from Africa up to the Near East, the Mediterranean, and over to India, what is today Iran, Iraq, all of that. These were the trade routes. That's why God put his people here. He could have put them somewhere else. He put them there for a reason. But these traders are coming through, and they'd buy anything. They'd buy anything. Think of the traders you see in the Star Wars movies. That's exactly the culture and what they were like. They'd buy anything, anyone, anybody, and sell them to anyone, anybody. It was all about the price. And so whether you want to call them Ishmaelites or Midianites, they took him, and off to Egypt Joseph goes. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and I, where shall I go? Reuben seems genuinely distraught here, so that earns him a couple points, I think. Now, again, we've got the Sunday school pictures in our mind. There are 10 brothers out there. They're all together. They're watching the flocks. They're sitting around the fire, eating dinner, whatever. That is a very limited picture. They had herdsmen, people out watching the flocks. They would send them out all points of the compass so that they could find pasture, so that they could find water, and they had to go and supervise those disparate groups. Okay. That's why it could be Reuben wasn't there when they were ordering pizza and deciding to sell their brother while he was crying in the pit. Okay. Reuben was off doing something, and he comes back and he finds this out, and he does seem genuinely distraught. And now the callous goes up another notch. It gets worse. You know, it's like, I heard a speaker one time at a conference I was at. It was a business conference, and the guy was really funny. But he'd say, people come up and say to me, oh, business, it just can't get any worse than that. And he said, that's a challenge you don't want to lay down. Well, here, as far as how callous and awful and cold-blooded they have been, you'd think it couldn't get any worse. Oh, yeah, it can, because they still have to deal with reporting this to Dad. And I want to see if you catch what I caught going through this time. I've always had a picture in my mind, probably framed by those Sunday school pictures. And for those of you who are really old like me, the flannel graphs on the wall, raise your hand if you remember flannel graphs. You're really old if you remember flannel graphs. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? Let's stop here. It says they sent it. You see, they couldn't all just pack up and head back. We've talked before about the logistics of moving these flocks and all of that. They sent it with someone else with a message. They didn't go and report it themselves. They sent it with one of their people or a small group of their workers and took it back to Dad so they could deliver the message, do you recognize this, whether it is your son's or not? They knew it was his. They could look at it and tell. It's just cold. It's just heartless. And he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. Now the sons have come back, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. One thing, and you see it highlighted here in orange, his daughters. We'd only heard about Dinah, and then we talked then about why she was the one who was mentioned with the incident with Dinah. That's why she was mentioned. Didn't mean he didn't have other daughters. They would just list the sons. Now, right now, look at the little Israelite in your head, and he's going, duh, of course, because that's the way things were done. But they sent this thing to him, and he is distraught. It's one thing. And those of you who have, and I want to be very sensitive in doing this, it is painful enough to lose a child. To think that he was devoured by a wild beast, which generally means he was probably eaten alive in part, makes it all the worse. It's just agonizing. You know, he got hit by lightning and he's dead. That's one thing. He died an agonizing, terrible death. That makes it all the worse. And we get a glimpse here, too, of the way they looked at things. For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. And thus his father wept for him. Their view of the afterlife, they believed that they were going to be brought up out of the underworld, but they believed they went down. It will be talking about going to their fathers. Here, his son has preceded him, and he's talking about going down to the grave to my son in mourning. He's going to mourn until the day he dies, is what he says. And we can beat up the old man for having played favorites, all of that. We do not want to be cold and heartless and not recognize the agony and pain that he is going through. Very real. And his other sons are going to have to live with that forever. It's one thing to commit a heinous act. It's another thing to have to live with the one who suffers because of that heinous act and see the anguish of soul that is there for years and years and years and years. Now the Midianites had sold him, Joseph, in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So that's where things stand. He's there far away in Egypt. His brothers have no idea what happens to him. And that's where things stand. Joseph is gone. Israel, Jacob, is mourning, and his brothers are there seeing the consequences of all of this. I hope that in going through this today, we're going to stop here. We've got Judah and Tamar in front of us, which we will go through, but relatively quickly. So heads up, after this, go read chapter 38. Go read all of it. Go read the Bible. Wow, that's really good advice. But read chapter 38, so that you're familiar with it, because we're going to go through it relatively quickly. It's interesting. It's there for a reason. The Holy Spirit does not waste ink, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. We want to continue on with Joseph, which is the major tapestry that is being woven here. Hey, thank you for listening. Got a lot of people subscribing, got a lot of people watching. Do those things I talked about earlier, like, subscribe, comment, and if you want to throw share in there, that's great. Help us get this word out. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.